Okay, welcome back. This is part 4. As you can see, I'm now building the engine side of this harness. I have done quite a few of them already. Knock sensor, oil, TPS, etc., etc. I'm not going to actually put the heat gun on these and make the heat shrink go to the loom until everything is done. But what you see there is set up already. Some of these are pull to seat, like these ones, or you have to make sure that you have all the things in proper order, from the weather stripping, the weather pack that goes at the back of the connector, pull the proper wires through. And to do that properly, I had to go online and grab all the sensors, and on the sensor you can see, like this being the oil, you can see an A and a B at the top, and the bottom, which would be this one, would be the C. So going over to my piece of paper here, this is the map, fuel and oil, and that's the pinout from A, B, and C. So you know that the 5-volt reference is B, the ground is A, and the bottom one would be the input signal. So I've done that for all of my sensors, so I know that I'm actually pinning these things correctly with the IAC and everything else. Now I've basically come to the point where I'm going to start doing the injector side, and I went and picked up my connectors for the injectors, had them all laser engraved along with my smart coils. I picked up some more wire for that, and I'm going to start getting into this bit by bit. I've just done a check and made sure that the lengths for my injector harness for each cylinder was written down. So I'm going to add a couple inches to every one of these, just to have that grace period, that I don't end up making these things short, because the last thing I want to do is have an issue when I put it on the car that it's too tight with the way that I've routed it. So this is the start. We'll see how it works in a couple hours, and I will let you guys know where I'm at. Okay, well, with this harness, remember in part 1 where I went to every pinout and marked the color code of each wire based off of the schematic? Well, each one of these pins, from pin A to, I guess, B4, which would be the 6th cylinder, which is green, all of those color codes I have to cut these lengths to. So not just to trust my verbiage that I've put on this piece of paper, I have to double check it back to the pinouts that I had originally done on this one before I make the cuts and make these lengths to these wires. You can only do this once. If I screw this part up, then I'm really going to end up making a hodgepodge thing out of this whole deal. So it's a double check, triple check type thing, and now that I've got all the lengths properly cut, I can add the positive side to each one of these connectors, which is again pull to seat. So I have to take the weather pack off of it, pull the wire through, put my heat shrink on loom on the other side, because that's the only time that you can do that, because you're not going to get a heat shrink over top of this. And then pull the wire through, crimp it, solder it, and pull it right into the seat, and move on until I finish all 6. So that's how it starts. Make sure that you check, double check, and triple check all of your settings and cuts and lengths, and which terminal you're doing, and which wire, which color. No mistakes, not at this point. Now that I have loomed and put the heat shrink 2 on each side, I have now put each connector with the correct wire for the correct cylinder. And I didn't see on here which part it went into for the hot side or the signal side. And then I took a look at the harness that I got from Holley, and the right side is always the signal and the left side is always the hot side. So that's what I have done with mine, and I will be using thicker wire for the hot side. As you can see, the difference of the wire is quite substantial. I want to send the most amperage to these injectors. So what I'm going to do is I'm no longer going to put a connector on it. As you can see, the signal wires go straight into the bulkhead. So each wire is going to have the hot side coming to it, and I'm going to break out the hot side. So I'm going to have all 6 welded into one, which I'm going to run a very thick wire that goes to the relay that I'm going to have run directly to the alternator. So this is basically going to be an injector harness that is going to be a hot wire harness incorporated with my bulkhead harness. Let's get it. And there you go. The injector side is now complete. Again, I'm not going to put the heat gun to all of these shrink wraps until I have every last piece of this done. But you can see all my connectors, all the loom. And this engraving in here is really nice, the laser engraving. Really like that. And as you can see, my mind is always switching. I was going to put a connector here so I could plug in the harness, but figured why give room for another possible error to have with a connector connecting when I can go straight from the bulkhead right to the injector. What I am going to make at this point is connect all 6 of these hot side wires into one big 10 gauge wire and run that straight to the relay for my hot wire kit. And as you can see, the difference in the size of wire is quite evident. That's why I will be supplying the injectors with more power and basically ditching the one that I got from Holley. I just figured that I need more with the bigger injector, especially now that I'm going to be powering this from the back of the alternator. So that's gone. All I have left to do now is the links for my cam and crank with a connector and loom, and the smart coils, which now I have to basically start off with making pigtails on the existing connectors that I do have, because there's 5 leads that go into each smart coil, and that's the next step. Alright, now we're nearing the stretch and I'm on to the smart coils. And as you can see with the smart coils, if I can actually get the light to focus on this, A, B, C, D, you can see all the letters written on each terminal. There's 5 in total, from A to E. And that correlates with this, from A to E. So the first, being A, which is the empty cavity right here, that is for the coil trigger. So this is coming off the harness. Each one of these represent a cylinder. So that cylinder is going in that hole. Second is B, which is the B14. This is the B14. So there's 6 individual cylinders and all of them get tied into this one. So that is for the second one here, which is B14, and it says on here any wire is acceptable, any gauge wire. So that would be that one. C is a ground to the cylinder head, and I'm using 16 gauge for C. So I'm starting off using these things as pigtails, because this is a pull to seat type of deal. With this being the pin, I got to pull the wires through the connector, strip them, crimp them, then solder them, and pull them to seat. Okay, and D is a battery ground. So what I plan on doing with D, you can see it's a thick gauge wire that I'm using here. It's like 16 gauge. So I'm going to join a bank together. So 135 is going to be on one bank, 246 is going to be on the other bank, and I'm going to connect them inside the car and run them directly to the battery. E is switched current 12 volt power, which I'm again going to run it the exact same way that I'm doing the injectors, where I'm going to bring them all together, tie it in, and then that is going to run to this. So one relay is going to be for the smart coils. The second relay is going to be for the injectors, and they're going to be fused as well. And off on the left side where you see the 5 and the 7.5, I'm going to use one of those fuses for keyed ignition. Just going to put a fuse on that just because I have it. And this is where we're going to start. Slowly but surely. Once this portion is done and I merge this in with the harness, it's time to then put everything in the car and start wiring this thing up and getting it ready to go. But we're very close now. Coming back to this smart coil deal, remember I said before that I was going to do some redundancy in this coil and pass a couple grounds through there and a couple 5 volt reference through there just because I have extra pins. I'm going to do the same with B14. So what I'm going to end up doing with B14, which is pin B, I'm going to keep a bank and I'm going to have it on one wire, which B14 is the black with the yellow stripe. And if I could see that right there, I can see that I've already got a pin accessible. I've kept everything in banks, so you can see on the bulkhead connector, this is for the smart coils. I did the same for the injector, so everything sits basically in its own set. So right off the rip there, I can see that I got in between the orange and the blue, there's an empty cavity there. So I'm going to add another B14 that I'm going to use for 135, and the other one I'm going to use for 246. And I'm going to make that merge to the other side of this bulkhead connector where the actual B14 runs straight to the ECU. Okay, I just finished wrapping up the smart coil side of it. This is 1, 3, and 5. Got them in banks, and this one is 2, 4, and 6. So these have to be tied together with a connector, and that gets sent to the hot wire that's going to be getting power directly from the alternator. The ground is going to go directly to the battery, and then these little smaller ones are going to be tied into a 10 gauge. That's going to go to the back of the cylinder head. So we're pretty much wrapping this thing up. I'm going to finish up these, put connectors on them, loom it, heat shrink it, and then I can finally start putting the heat gun to all of these shrink wraps and finally have it in final position to get ready to install in the car. But it's looking good. We're there. Stay tuned. Part 5's coming up.